And now we're going to hear on a totally different matter, but extremely important matter, from Kathy Hoekstra. And you may recall that Kathy has spoken to us before. She's with the Pacific Legal Foundation, and they do wonderful work protecting the liberty and the property rights of our fellow Americans. They're, I think, analogous to the Institute for Justice in that regard. They've had some signature victories here recently, and she agreed to come out and tell us what's going on. And as I said at the beginning of the meeting, Michigan is often, interestingly enough, a battleground on a lot of these topics. You know, civil asset forfeiture, protecting our privacy, and in this case, protecting our property when somebody has allegedly paid maybe just a little bit less property tax than they were supposed to or something, according to the officials, and then they try to steal the person's property. Pacific Legal Foundation is on the front lines protecting us against that sort of abuse. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for the great Kathy Hoekstra.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. I appreciate it. And thanks again for inviting me. Again, as Dennis mentioned, I did speak, what was it, about a year or so ago, maybe? Yeah, and I had the honor of being able to talk about Pacific Legal Foundation more in general, who Pacific Legal Foundation is, what we do, as Dennis mentioned, sort of like Institute for Justice. We do fight, defend liberty and justice for all Americans, defend people's constitutional protections when government tramples them. And as we all know, government never ceases in their pursuit of power, no matter what they have to do to acquire that power. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is actually Michigan-specific litigation that Pacific Legal Foundation is involved in. Now, even though we have Pacific in the title, Pacific Legal Foundation is a nationwide public interest law firm started in California by members of then Governor Ronald Reagan's staff when Governor Reagan lamented the fact that government and special interests had very strong legal representation and the average American did not. And therefore, Pacific Legal Foundation was born. It has since spread across the United States. We have offices in Washington, D.C., Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, Seattle, and many remote locations. We have built out in the past couple of years, gone through a major expansion, added to our litigation team, built out hugely our communications and outreach and public education and strategic research, and we have people all over the country. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to live and work out of my home in Saginaw Township, where I've lived since work brought me there in 1996. And I'm happy to say I'm able to bring my son Zach with me, as Dennis mentioned. Zach, quick background, I commented a little while ago, I did local television for a lot of years up in the Saginaw, Flint Bay City, Midland area. And up until I left TV, it was easy for my kids to know what their mom did. Then I went and worked at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, and since then my kids have had no idea what it is I actually do. So I did urge, and my son Zach has been, very honestly, once in a while asking me a lot of questions about, the things he's hearing and seeing, and on social media, and what he's hearing people say, as well as what his friends and family say. And so we've had a lot of discussions about why focusing on policy is more important than focusing on politics and politicians. And therefore, I encouraged him he had nothing to do tonight, so I said, why don't you come on down and maybe you'll actually get a glimpse of what Mom does. So, I'm going to start just with this. The question that's there on the screen: can government constitutionally confiscate a $60,000 house to pay an $8 tax debt? Short answer is no, because why? We have a Fifth Amendment, an Eighth Amendment, and we also have common law protections against unjust enrichment by government actors, right? Longer answer, however, in Michigan, the answer is yes, because we have a General Property Tax Act that allows this to happen and actually encourages it. Now, home equity theft is a term that we've sort of has evolved as when Pacific Legal Foundation first started taking on some of these cases. And we have found that home equity theft really captures the injustice. And I'll explain for the term is a little bit vague, but when you think about it, it's not. But I'll start with this. So how many of you have ever, miscalculated a bill and underpaid it? That happened. There you go. And well, not everybody else has mom to, swing some money your way. But what happens when you don't have mom to help you out? Typically, you get a late fee tacked onto your bill, or you might even get a nasty gram, right, in the mail that says pay, or we're going to send collectors after you. You get notice, and that you figure something out. Well, what about when you miscalculate maybe and underpay your property taxes, even just by a few dollars? Well, in about 12 states, give or take, we call it the dirty dozen, government, when this happens and you've made an underpayment, you've miscalculated, government can seize your property, they can foreclose on it, sell it, and keep all the proceeds and leave you with nothing. In Michigan, right now anyway, is ground zero for this injustice, and this is why Pacific Legal Foundation is here. Very quickly, I want to a little bit more background on PLF in case you're not familiar with some of the work we've done, fighting bad government and bureaucrats when they disregard and trample our constitutional protections. We are the nation's premier defender of liberty and justice for all. We have litigated 14 cases now at the United States Supreme Court and won 12. Our very latest one was in June. I believe when I spoke to this group earlier, we were in the process of arguing the U.S. Supreme Court case. It is an unmatched record among liberty-minded organizations like ours, on par with the ACLU, with the fraction of the budget. 12 of those cases that we've litigated at the Supreme Court involve property rights, including one you may have heard of, a 2006 Supreme Court case called Rapanos v. United States. So even as far back as 2006, Pacific Legal Foundation has been defending the property rights of folks right here in Michigan. So it's safe to say we know what we're talking about when it comes to property rights, which brings us to home equity theft, one of the more sinister forms of property rights. Okay, home equity theft in Michigan. This gentleman to the left on your screen, his name is Yuri Raffaelli. In 2011, he bought some rental property in Southfield. It was this home down on the lower right portion of the screen. It was through his LLC, bought the home, and started renting it out. Pardon me?
He formed a limited partnership?
Yeah, no, a limited liability corporation. He's just the sole proprietor of it. He just, bought the property, rented it out. That's what his business did. He's a businessman, entrepreneur, and creating affordable housing for other people in a nice, working class, modest neighborhood in Southfield. He bought the property in 2011 and inadvertently, didn't know it at the time, had underpaid the 2011 property taxes. Paid in full 2012 and 2013. 2013, he learns, oh, you know what? I underpaid this. Goes to the Oakland County Treasurer's office and thought he fixed it, thought he paid up, made the extra payments from 2011, but he mistakenly did not factor in interest that was growing on that debt. The total underpayment was $8.41. In 2014, Oakland County foreclosed on that property, sold it for $24,500, and kept all of that. It's okay. A government, can chase you for the $8.41. We all agree with that. But when you take the property and you keep above and beyond everything beyond what was actually owed in the first place, that's your home equity. That is the equity in his property that the county kept. That is home equity theft. The gentleman up on the top right, during all this, Yuri, who's an older gentleman, he's semi-retired and moved to Israel. The upper guy in the upper right is his son-in-law, Yair Enendenko. He lives in East Grand Rapids with his family. Yair took over his father-in-law's business interest. So when the 2014 rolled around and this started happening, Yair tried to take care of it just days before the property was being foreclosed on, if I have my chronology right. He personally went to Andy Meisner's office. Andy Meisner, as you all know, is the county treasurer of Oakland County, who's at the time is in charge of all this stuff. He personally went to Andy Meisner's office and said, really, you know, can we take care of this? And Andy Meisner basically told him to pound sand. Get lost. Pound sand. Too late. So they were stuck. And that's where we are at the moment. Next is Andre Onessian. This gentleman bought 2.7 acres of pretty valuable land in Orchard Village. It's near West Bloomfield. He owed $6,000 from back taxes spanning 2011, 12, and 13. Same story. The Oakland County Treasurer seized his property, sold the entire thing for $82,000, and kept all the profits, not just the $6,000 that were owed. Okay, yep, thank you. And what you are looking at now, this is even more infuriating. This is Yuri Raffaelli's property today. Oakland County has actually held on to both of those properties since foreclosing and seizing them and selling them and keeping all the proceeds. Oakland County still owns these properties. Neither is back on the tax rolls. In late February, PLF, our lead attorney, Christina Martin, and I, she works out of our Florida office, but she's the lead on all of our home equity theft work. And she's representing Yuri and Andre, which I'll get to in just a moment. She and I went and scoped out Yuri's property. We were curious to find out what kind of shape it's in. As you can tell, the outside on the left, obviously neglected. There's overgrowth all over the yard. There's branches and sticks and trees all over. I don't have this particular picture, but over on the side, there's a brick chimney. And in between the wall of the house and the chimney, there's actually a tree growing out from in between. I'm not kidding. And as you can see on the inside, we went around the back and took pictures with our cell phones and took pictures of the inside, and it's completely dilapidated. Ceilings collapsed in. There's insulation and debris everywhere. It's filthy, and this is how government takes care of Yuri's home for the sake of $24,000.
Somebody paid $24,000.
No, but, well, they did, but I don't know all the machinations, but it ended up, whoever bought it at foreclosure gave it back to the county, said, we don't want this anymore.
Can't keep good title, blah, blah, blah.
I don't know all of those details, but I do know that the county does own these properties, and basically has almost the whole time. I think the property went back to the county not long after the foreclosure auction.
This is 5 years later.
This is exactly. So protecting or pocketing $24,000 was more important to Oakland County's treasurer than allowing Yuri to pay his debt and make productive use of his property as a rental home and providing affordable housing for somebody who needs it. Now imagine what the neighbors must think. Yeah. What if you lived next door to this house? Wouldn't you just be livid? I know I would. So property, as I alluded to a moment ago, is property in the form of home equity is still property, and it deserves the same constitutional protection as the property itself. Michigan's General Property Tax Act allows and encourages these property takings without compensating the property owners. You see where I'm going with this Fifth Amendment takings clause, which protects you from government taking your property without just compensation. So Yuri and Andre sued, this was before PLF got involved, that government unconstitutionally intentionally took their property without just compensation when it kept the proceeds of the sales, when it kept their home equity. Again, PLF wasn't representing them at the time, but we did file an amicus brief. It was it went to the Michigan Court of Appeals. That court ruled against Yuri and Andre, dangerously expanding civil asset forfeiture law to include non-criminal activities, and upheld this bureaucratic theft. So PLF jumped in to represent these gentlemen, and we, to our pleasure, asked the Michigan Supreme Court to review their case and overturn the part of the Michigan General Property Tax Act that allows this, and also vindicate Yuri and Andre's constitutional property rights. And PLF takes on legislation because we want to set long-lasting precedent. Of course, we want to protect all Michigan property owners from this bureaucratic theft. And we just learned this week, the Michigan Supreme Court makes their fall argument dates, sets them in August. And Christina called me the other day and said she's waiting for a letter from the Supreme Court. But as of right now, the oral argument we're looking at probably October 2nd or 3rd. Now that could change. The defense could file motions to, postpone and all that other stuff. But we're keeping our fingers crossed that we can get this argument and get it before the Supreme Court in the fall. So we're really excited about that. Okay, now, Oakland County is not the only guilty party here. Yuri and Andre were not just a 1 and 2 off here in the state of Michigan. This gentleman right here is Henderson Hodges. He lives in Van Buren County over in western Michigan. Van Buren County did the same to him as Oakland County did to Yuri and Andre. They took his childhood home and farmland that his father had worked for his entire life over a $5,900 tax debt. The county sold it and pocketed the $42,000 profit and left Henderson Hodges with nothing except his father's old tractor. Van Buren County, I don't have pictures of these, but Van Buren County also took land owned by a church, Wayside Church. They took the land that the church used for a youth camp. Now, the church did owe $16,750 in taxes, penalties, interest, and fees. County sold it. That's probably a whole nother, I don't know all of those rules, but the county did sell it for $206,000, and the county kept the $189,000 windfall. Myron Stahl, also of Van Buren County, was building his retirement home on his property. County sold it for $68,000 plus to pay a $25,000 debt, kept all the proceeds. All of these owners lost everything. Now, the reason I'm bringing up these 3 other parties in Van Buren County is because prior to or simultaneous to Yuri and Andre taking their case to the state of Michigan, these 3 parties in Van Buren County filed a federal lawsuit, which was initially dismissed over jurisdiction from a precedent that PLF actually got overturned at the Supreme Court in June, but that's kind of a whole, we can talk about that later, as well as the federal court assumed, the state courts are going to take this case, take care of it. This is really ridiculous that it would even come to us. However, Yuri and Andre's case proved the latter wrong. The state did not take care of this injustice, and PLF's Supreme Court victory in June overturned the Williamson County precedent that the federal court was initially concerned about. So we went back. We said, hey, federal court, look, the state continued to support this injustice. Supreme Court overturned that other precedent you were concerned about. Will you retake our case? And it's rare to ask a federal court to do that in the first place. It's even rarer for the federal court to say, yeah, we'll reopen it, but they did. So these 3 gentlemen from Van Buren County County, they do have a case sitting in federal court right now that is just waiting to see what the Michigan Supreme Court is going to do. So we're giving the Michigan's home equity theft problem a 1-2 punch right now at the Michigan Supreme Court and in federal court. Now, but I'm not done. But wait, there's more. This is Erica and Romaldo Perez. Erica is Romaldo's daughter. And they and their family live in a small apartment in New Jersey. They've been lived there for Erica's whole life. Christina visited it in earlier this year, and she made this note in a blog post. She said, and this is again their apartment in New Jersey, "I stared at bare walls and noticed the minimalism. Nearly everything in their living room is utilitarian, but later she learned why. The family was living very, very simply on a very disciplined budget because they wanted to save money and invest in a better life." What Erica told me was the American dream. Now, to them, their American dream was moving someplace where they could actually afford to buy a home, not in New Jersey, and they chose Detroit, Michigan, because they have family here. In the Mexican town area. And so their American dream, what they did is they went to a working class neighborhood on the southwest side, again, kind of the Mexican town area, and they bought this property that has 2 buildings on it. The one in the forefront is a house with 4 apartment units in it. The one in the back is a single family home. So what they decided to do, what they spent the next 3 years doing after they purchased this property in 2012, they spent fixing up. Romaldo drove about every other weekend from New Jersey. It's about an 11-hour drive, if you've ever made that drive one way, to fix up the property, to supervise, work that was being done. The family spent tens of thousands of dollars fixing up the front unit to get it ready for tenants. Because what the intent was, get some tenants in there, we'll start generating an income there, and we'll fix up our single-family home so we can move there when Romaldo retires and she has a brother still in high school. The kid graduates from high school, dad retires, we're just going to come out here. And you know what? This is more than we've ever had. This is our American dream. This is our family legacy. Well, you guys know where this is all going, right? In 2017, they did have a tenant firmly in place and paying rent, and the American dream for them was within reach, but that dream turned into a nightmare. They had faithfully paid their taxes to Wayne County. They didn't realize, they were still living in New Jersey, mind you, they didn't realize they underpaid their 2014 taxes by $144. Notification of the underpayment were going to wrong addresses. And the bills they did get, they paid everything. 2015, 2016, no problem. Those bills didn't say, oh, by the way, there's a past balance. So they had no idea. So the Perez's, they were completely unaware of both the underpayment and another $359 in interest and penalties and fees that were getting tacked on by the county. So, unbeknownst to them, Wayne County foreclosed on their property, sold it at auction for $108,000, and we almost have a refrain, kept every cent, not just the $500 owed. The Perez's actually, sidebar, only learned that their property was no longer theirs when their tenant and a family member, a local one in town, called them to tell them, you know what, some strangers showed up here and started taking pictures of the property. There's something going on. You better, come here. So they called a local attorney who looked into it and said, yeah, you know what, your property's not even in your name anymore. So Erica and Romaldo on July 9th, just a month ago, filed a state lawsuit against Wayne County and the county treasurer, Eric Sabry, who, has had his share of problems in that treasurer's office. Now, a lot of people ask, well, gee, you already got Yuri and Andre's case going to the Michigan Supreme Court. You got this federal one waiting in the wings. Why on earth are you filing another one? Well, we are adding a couple different legal theories because, hey, we may as well knock out every possible, constitutional violation that the Michigan's Property Tax Act allows these governments to do. In addition to the Fifth Amendment taking without just compensation that Erica and her father are suing. We've also tacked on, the Eighth Amendment excessive fines, considering it an unjust punishment of equating the difference as a fine. And also the common law protection, as I mentioned, that forbids unjust enrichment. The county is required under that to act in good faith to avoid tax foreclosures whenever practical and just. So, for instance, the county could have done all kinds of things to recoup that $500. They could have taken a rental payment. They could have taken the family to small claims court and arranged an installment plan. There's a number of things the county could have done, but they didn't, and therefore we are raising that unjust enrichment violation in their lawsuit. So those are the active litigation that we have going on right now. But Michigan is not a one-off state in home equity theft. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are, a dirty dozen. More states besides Michigan engage in some form of this home equity theft. Different states have different versions of this, scheme. But the states that we have identified as having some sort of scheme like this going on, a home equity scheme, Alabama, Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Iowa, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nebraska, New York, North Dakota, Oregon, and Rhode Island. Now, there was one other state that did engage in a form of home equity theft, which PLF had a hand in stopping effectively. This was Montana. Montana had a practice where local treasurers sold foreclosed homes to preferred private investors. Now, again, it's a little bit different, but it's the same idea. People's home equity were being stolen from them without compensation. And the Montana legislature recently passed a bill banning this practice, but the senator who sponsored this bill got the legislature involved in consultation with PLF. Christina Martin went and spoke with legislators. She spoke at a hearing that said, we're already suing Michigan. We don't want to sue you as well, which was great. She spoke, and we also have a legal policy expert on staff that helped, look at the legislative process and the bill that they were writing. And they ended up drafting a bill that was passed by both sides of the aisle overwhelmingly. So now in the state of Montana, no home can be transferred to private investors without compensating owners. So that's a huge victory. And, we are ramping up our fight against home equity theft in Michigan and any other state where it exists. So stay tuned. But here in Michigan, hopefully we will have even more and better news the next time I come and speak to your group about home equity theft. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions. I know a lot of people, some of them I'm not an attorney, so I don't know if I'll be able to answer all of them to your satisfaction, but you can always go to our website and find out. Yes, Dan.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Thank you very much. How about a big round of applause? I have a two-part question here. One, what does the Michigan Constitution say about the Michigan Constitution?
The Michigan Constitution's takings clause is actually more strict than the federal clause. Now that, I actually looked at Christina's brief filed with the Michigan Supreme Court, and I actually made a note because I was wondering if somebody was going to ask about that. Now, I don't know, I must, Michigan's taking clause offers greater protection than its federal counterpart, and thus, this is right from her brief, the court has no reason to limit itself to only weighing decisions that interpret the federal takings clause. Now, I don't know the nuances that make it stronger, but this is as solid as I can get.
So, I have a friend, Suzanne Sherman, and Suzanne, you hear me raising this point now when you watch the video.
Hi, Suzanne
Yeah.
Sherman.
Oh, it's a state issue. Should we be looking at the state constitution instead of the federal constitution? I raise it as a point, maybe it's just rhetorical for right now, but it's very important actually. But secondly, what about the Michigan legislature? Is there anybody in the Michigan legislature trying to fix this?
We have had interest from State Senator Runstead is looking into this. Yeah. And I think there are some other legislators who are, have been looking into it as well. So, yeah, it is a legislative fix. There's no question. Now, PLF would like to see it through legally, of course, because we want to set the precedent so nobody can write any, thing like this again. But we fully encourage legislators, anybody who wants to correct this injustice to Michigan property owners, by all means.